Now we're going to move on to our second gourmet product, which was salt. Just a little history of salt. Over history, it's been considered worth its weight in gold. It was traded as a commodity. And different places around the world have gone under siege for their access to salt. There were salt roads created, paths to go to and from the salt mines. Salt was a commodity like spices were. In Roman times, Romans were given their salary, or this salarium argentinum, and I'm sorry I don't speak Latin, I'm sorry if I'm butchering it, which was basically money for salt. So the Romans were given their money or their salary for salt. And in India, Mahatma Gandhi conducted his salt march to free India from British colonial rule and the salt tax. And here in the U.S., there have been salt wars or salt ambushes to protest the control of salt. As I said before, it was used as currency. And it's also been worshipped as a divinity. And in many modern and ancient religions, salt is part of the worship service. And before the Industrial Revolution, salt mining was a very dangerous process and was involved in the slave trade because slaves were often used to mine salt. When we look about salt in biology, the human body cannot exist without salt or sodium. It controls our blood volume and our muscle contractions. It controls nervous impulses. It's one of the 4 primary electrolytes of the body. And all 4 of the cationic electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium, and calcium, are available in unrefined salt. If you have too much or too little salt in your body, it can range from a huge amount of conditions from dizziness to death. If your balance of electrolytes are off, including sodium, you can easily die. So we have our 12 different gourmet salts, which differed from different crystal sizes, such as these really large black pyramid-shaped crystals to very fine powders. They ranged in different regions. We had Mediterranean salt, Australian salt, Himalayan salt, salt from France, salt from Israel. So they range from all over the world. They also range, as you can see by the picture, greatly in color. We had red, brown, yellow, black, gray. And we also had different sources. We had sea salts and we had mineral deposit salts. In addition to our gourmet salts, we tested plain table salt and sodium chloride reagent. And we used about 0.1 to 0.15 grams dissolved in 50 mils of water with 2% nitric acid. And then we conducted ICP-MS using our SPEX CertIPrep certified reference material as standards and calibration. This is a chart of the different salt types that we did study. We have Cyprus black salt, which is the Mediterranean sea salt, dark gray, very, very large crystals. We have very small flakes from this pink salt from Australia. So there are some river salts, some sea salts, some mineral deposits. We have brown salt here, which is a fine powder from India. And we have a French Chardonnay oak smoked salt, which is a sea salt that was been smoked in oak barrels with wine. And they have some very wet crystals that we looked at. If we look at some of the macronutrients, there was a wide range of different macronutrients we found in the salt. Now, if you start to look up the benefits of sea salt or the benefits of gourmet salt, salt purveyors will tell you that these gourmet salts are unrefined salts, which are good for you because they contain almost every element on the periodic chart. And that may be true, but we did find a very large variation between just these beneficial nutrients such as magnesium. We found a low response of 35 milligrams per kilogram to over 8,000 milligrams per kilogram. So there was a large variation. There was no real consistency on any of these particular macronutrients. Now if we look at some of the toxic metals that we found in gourmet salts, we found that first in cadmium, there wasn't cadmium found present in, I would say, the majority of our samples. There were a few small samples that we were able to detect a small amount of cadmium, such as in this black salt, this pink crystal salt, and this gray salt. And there was actually even a little bit in our table salt. But most of the other salts, we are not able to detect any cadmium. If we look at the lead, though, every sample in our study had a small to a somewhat significant amount of lead in it. And the salts that actually did have a large amount of lead, again, were these colored salts, this black flake sea salt, this gray salt, this pink Himalayan salt again, and this gray smoked salt. Mercury we found in most of our sea salt samples, or most of our gourmet salt samples. Again, the colored salts did seem to have the presence of mercury, where this black flake salt had a level of mercury with this red crystal salt, another black Hawaiian salt. Our table salt and our reagent did not have any mercury in it. And with arsenic, I'm happy to say we were unable to detect arsenic in any of our samples except for these two here, this Indian brown mineral salt and this Australian crystal pink, and even then it's a very, very small amount. And also with thallium, we had in almost every sample a small to a significant amount of thallium in our samples here. If we just look at some of the higher values, you can see some of our salt samples actually did not exceed any high values of any particular toxic metal. And these tended to be the white crystal salts. This is Mediterranean white crystal salt, this is Israeli white salt. There's one or two pink salts, so that did not have any significant toxic metals in them as well. The ones that did have several large quantities of toxic metals always seem to be these colored salts, the black salt, the gray salt. If we look at our elements of concern and look at the range of response we got for them, for arsenic, we at the low end didn't detect it at all, to a small amount of 0.1 micrograms per gram. The same with the cadmium. We had about the same response. The most concern of this whole table is the mercury and the lead. Some of our samples didn't have any mercury in it, but on the high side we had 0.18 micrograms per gram. And for lead, we had the lowest response of 0.4 micrograms per gram and the highest response of 1.3 micrograms per gram. So what does that mean in real numbers? Well, a gram of salt is about 1/6 of a teaspoon. So if you consider an average daily serving of these salts could be from half a teaspoon to a teaspoon a day, you're talking about 3 to 6 grams of this material. And why should we be concerned about these toxic metals? Well, cadmium, lead, and mercury can cause toxicity at very low concentration. Lead is a cumulative poison that can build in your tissues and cause cancer and reproductive toxicity. Cadmium can cause joint pain, high blood pressure, kidney and liver damage. Arsenic can cause skin cancer and liver and kidney failure. And mercury, which is considered to be the most toxic of the heavy metals, can cause tiredness, loss of appetite, and brain damage. So how much are we allowed? Now, these calculations are for an average adult. The calculations for children would be based on their weight. For a 6-gram daily serving, which is about that 1 teaspoon mark of salt, of the highest varieties we found, you would have received about 0.6 micrograms of arsenic. Now, the allowable daily limit for arsenic is 130 micrograms. So in this one serving, you would have about 0.5% arsenic level. For cadmium, again, we have about 0.6 micrograms in that 6-gram serving. Your allowable daily limit is 55 micrograms. So you would have a little bit more. You'd have maybe 1.25% of your allowable daily limit. Again, you know, as long as you're careful with your diet, that's probably not too big of a deal. The problem comes in when we start looking at the mercury and lead levels. The highest mercury sample we found in a 6-gram sample, about 1.1 micrograms, and your allowable daily limit is only 8 for mercury. So you would be having in that just a little bit of salt, you would have about 12% of your allowable daily limit just from that salt you put on your fish or your chicken. For lead, also, we found in our highest concentration about 8 micrograms. With an allowable daily limit of 50 micrograms, you would get about 16% of your allowable daily limit from that salt.